Today on Dynamic Art, we are going to explore designing a large format sign and actually producing it. So, stay tuned. Hi, thanks for staying with us. I'm your host, Daniel Butler, and like I said, we're going to go into designing a large format sign, and we're going to use a special system called a tile system. And the reason why we're going to use this system is because our printing system is smaller than the job that we need. And what you're going to find out is that a small printing system can still do a very big job and pull out very large profits. So let's get into what we're doing today. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get right into our design here. And like I normally like to do, I like to kind of show you what things look like once they're done, and then we're just going to kind of walk them backwards. Overall, this particular design is really basic, nothing too complicated. And because we're dealing with an actual customer, it's going to be exactly what they asked for, meaning they asked for the letter to be placed where it is. They asked for the images to be placed where they are. The only thing that I really had to say so in was the background, but overall, this is pretty much going to be exactly what the customer asked for. I don't like to go outside of those particular parameters. They fill out what's called a creative brief, and that gives me details on what they're looking for, and then they also review designs. But I kind of stick close to what they're looking for because they're the person paying. Even though I may have some conflicts with how they set up the design, ultimately it's going to be the client's choice, and that's kind of rule number one. Clients are always right when it comes to making the money. And so with that said, really just going to kind of go through how we set things up here and just walk things backwards, and then from there we're just going to go directly into the actual production of things. One of the key things I think that sometimes I do when they provide me with graphics, sometimes you want to make the actual client responsible for those graphics, because if they're grabbing them offline and they're supplying them to you, you can give them the issue of, well, hey, these are what you supplied me with and these are what I use, versus you taking those particular graphics. So I would recommend that if your client's not willing to pay for images and different things of that nature, you make them responsible for them and you run them based on their merit, because they'll be responsible for whatever's on their building. And just let them know that you hold no responsibility for those particular designs. A lot of times I have to do that because clients are unwilling to pay the extra fees that go into making what they're looking for. And you still want to work with those clients. You still want to make the money, but at the same time, you want to alleviate any particular issues that may come up when people are asking where images or things came from. And then in some cases, because they sell those particular products, they actually have the right to actually use that product and selling it, which is pretty much what we were dealing with when we were creating this. So real quick here, one thing I did want to show you is a cool way to take out a background. As you can see with this particular ring that we have going on here, is if you get something that has a white background and you're going to have it on something that is also white, you can use what's called a multiply right here, and you can hit multiply and your background will disappear. Now if I take that off, what you'll see is, and I'll just move it around here real quick, you're going to see that it's actually a square image here, and it will cover anything that because it's not, that background isn't transparent. But by going ahead and making it on the multiply layer, or multiply, I'm not next to the layer, multiply, what you're able to do is cause that white background to disappear and it becomes transparent. And then you can move it back to where you want it at. The other thing that you'll notice about this particular sign is that it's also, the lettering is really bold. The particular owner of this company wanted to make sure that people could see what his message was, and that was the most important thing. The jewelry and different things of that nature and watches kind of came secondary, although he did want those in there. One of the other things, and I'm just going to take some of this stuff out here. One of the other things that was kind of cool that I did, and I'm going to take all the text out, was the background. And what I did do in this particular case when it came to the background was I decided that I wanted to have a unique look to it, and I just pretty much took a background from a regular cloud scene and just took it through a filter and actually used like a poster type filter. And what that did was it allowed for to get these cloud-like shapes in the background, and I used that as a background for what we were going to lay initially what the customer wanted on top of it. So I kind of wanted to go through and just show you how we went through that process of laying this out. A couple more things to keep in mind is that this sign is 72 inches by 43 inches, or 43 inches high, 72 inches wide. And I designed it on that, which is really huge. It is a huge file in Photoshop that I actually decided to create this in. But when I take it over to the system, it's going to read it at the exact size, and everything's going to print extremely clear and well. Versus if you're dealing with a pixel program like Photoshop and you design it smaller and try to blow it up, you're going to get a lot of pixelization. So that's just one thing to keep in mind if you decide to use Photoshop to design any of your signs. Now, I do design signs in Illustrator as well. That way we can still bring up those levels and keep files pretty small. But in the same breath, sometimes it's easier to be a little bit more creative in Photoshop. And that's why you see me using Photoshop and not Illustrator in this particular case. And I was able to move extremely fast by doing some of the methods that I used in actual Photoshop. So with that said, let's see if we can't turn back on some of the things we turned off here and go back to our original look for the completion. There were a lot of different things that I had initially planned for it that were taken out of it, but like I said, you always do what the client is asking for, whether you agree with it or not. You're going to go ahead and just make sure that you keep your customer happy, and that should be one of your number one goals when it comes to, as you can see, I had different things going on here. Different watches or different things that were submitted, but this ultimately was going to be the actual design, and this is actually what you're going to see us run off here. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into the printing side of this. And one thing to keep in mind, we're going to show you the toweling system, but it is not going to be like on screen like you see this, and that's mainly because we're running our system separate. Our actual system that runs our machinery is separate from the machines that we design on. So with that said, let's go ahead and let's talk about the production part of this. So what we're using here today is our Roland BN20, and as you can see, it is the smallest printer that Roland has online. We're going to print on a matte vinyl, and the reason for that is because we're going to laminate it, and there's really no real need to use something that is already glossy if we're going to laminate it. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut everything down once it gets done printing. Everything is going to roll off on a row, and so we're going to have to separate these pieces by basically cutting them apart and we're going to do that by using a cutting board. And I prefer the kind that you can actually use like what I would consider like a roller blade versus the chopping type of blade. And it just makes it a little easier to line up everything and get everything cut accurately. Next, we're going to use what I would call a laminate machine and some laminate. And we're going to cut off a piece of the laminate and we're going to lay it over our actual graphic we want to actually laminate. We're going to peel back a little bit of the sticky part of the liner for the laminate, and we're going to cut away the part of the laminate that's basically protecting the sticky part, and we just want to expose that so that we can squeegee it onto our actual graphic. And this is just going to make it so that it's easier for the laminate machine to hold it, and it makes it easier for everything to line up. You're just going to squeegee it, get all the air bubbles out, take your time. This is not a stage that you want to rush in, because this is definitely a part where things can become bubbly if you don't take your time. And you just want to do about 1 inch to 2 inches of what you're going to laminate. You don't want to laminate the whole thing this way because it's really hard to prevent bubbles if you do. Cut away the rest of the sticky part of the laminate that's exposed. And the reason for this is we don't want it getting caught in the laminate machine when we roll it through. If you do that, it's going to make for a very sticky situation where things get trapped into the actual laminate machine, and you'll have to start the whole project all over again. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to get it ready to insert. And that piece that we actually put on the actual graphic of the laminate first, that's what's going to go in there. And that's just going to help it get gripped. Once we get that part of it gripped, we're going to bend it over and we're going to remove the backing from the rest of the laminate. And we're just going to kind of turn it in there just a bit, just to make sure that things are lined up correctly and the machine is grabbing it. Now we're going to go ahead and just take our laminate and turn and laminate the entire part of our graphic. And you just want to have a nice steady pace. Once we get done with that, we're going to also remove any of the laminate that's exposed after we get done laminating that piece. And that's just because we don't need the rest of this sticky part sticking to anything else, you know, getting hair or anything else in it. We're just going to cut all that off. Now that all our pieces are laminated, we're going to go ahead and lay everything out. And this is where the toweling system really comes into play. Toweling is basically a way that the printing unit will overprint a graphic so that you can line it up. So it will print a little bit more of each graphic on each side so that you can line everything up and overlay them on top of each other. And this just makes it easier when you're using a smaller printer to line all your images back up. And what I also do is I take tape and I put some in 2 places, leaving enough room for about, I put it in about a halfway mark, and then I go a couple more inches below that and also put tape down as well. And what this does is it helps me to be able to move the actual panels that we have, but they'll line back up when I lay them back down. And I'm going to show you that right here in a second. So we'll flip this over so that you can see that each one is basically taped down. When you flip them back over, make sure everything is laying flat and lined up, and then you can go ahead and flip the other one over, and as you can see, everything lined up perfectly. And from there, we can go ahead and we can start our squeegeeing method, where we basically remove the top part of the beginning part of the underlining for the vinyl. So we're going to remove that part, we're going to cut it off. Once we get done cutting it off, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start to squeegee it down. And we're doing this in halves. So we do the top half first. Making sure we get all those air bubbles out. You want to make sure that you squeegee it down nice. And we're going to squeegee it again. And you just look over everything, make sure all your air bubbles are out. Then from there, we're going to remove our tape, because now we have half of the actual panel down. And once we remove our tape, we're going to go ahead and we're going to repeat the same process with the lower part of our graphic in this panel. And we just remove that actual sheet. One thing to also keep in mind is you want to keep enough slack. You want to make sure that there's enough slack so that things are laying down smoothly and not enough tension where things are really tight. Because the thing is this is vinyl, so it does have the ability to be stretched. And if you pull real tight, you'll end up with things becoming misaligned because you're pulling it very tightly, and the vinyl will stretch on you. So just give it some slack, take your time, and just squeegee it all down. And then you'll go back over it to make sure that all your air bubbles are removed. Now, as you can see, all the panels are laid down. Everything is lined up the way we need it to. Our signage is pretty much complete at this point. The next part for us is the installation. As you can see, this is the building, and that is what is up there before we remove it. Now, as you can see, I am inserting the signage into the panels that were provided by the actual owner of the building. He wanted to use his existing sign holders, so we did have to measure and make sure things would fit directly into this. And as you can see, it looks a lot better than the previous signage that he had up. It's a lot more color, it's brighter, and that was the whole point and why I picked a particular background. It was so that it would lighten up the actual area that we're showing and give a little bit more attention to the actual building itself by having that nice signage in there. So as you can see, that is our part of our installation, and voila, we have a nice complete sign there. A lot of times when we get into doing these particular projects, a lot of things have to go into factor when we think about what we're going to charge for these particular designs. One of the big issues that you run into is your actual cost, your cost of product, your cost of time. These are all different factors that you want to actually go in and figure out exactly what this sign is going to cost you. But there are exceptions to the rule. One of the things that I have to do, because I compete with a larger market and bigger companies, is that sometimes I have to offer certain parts of the product free in order to maintain the outcome of getting that particular job. And what I mean by that is I may not be able to stop charging what I need to charge on the actual production of the sign because I have an actual physical cost involved. So I'll do things like I'll either decrease what I'm charging for the graphic design fee or erase it altogether. Or one of the other things that I can do is if I have to install this particular sign, I may waive the installation fee. Now, one thing I will recommend that you do is that you definitely want to make sure that you let your customer know that you're giving them a discount and give them the actual price. Say, hey, this typically would cost this amount of money, but For you, I'm going to waive this particular fee and give you a discount. What it does is it helps you secure that job, and it also gives you the opportunity to show your customer that you're not just trying to run a particular scam on them to get as much money as you can. This is really important when you're competing against large competitors. Now, not everybody will agree with this, and you have to do it at your own discretion. I'm not recommending that you don't charge for certain particular parts of the job, but I will recommend that you do evaluate what it takes to get the actual customer. Because in this field, competition is fierce, and sometimes you have to go with the flow. Please subscribe so that we can blow up this channel. Have a good day.